Imagine a country that sits on the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than the United States. By all logic, this nation should be the Dubai of Latin America. Its citizens should be wealthy. Its infrastructure should be futuristic. Its currency should be the envy of the developing world. Instead, it is a nation where the currency is worth less than the paper it is printed on, where the power grid fails daily, where millions have fled in search of survival. This is Venezuela. The mainstream media will tell you this is simply the result of socialism or gross mismanagement. And while corruption and poor policy certainly played a role, that is only half the story. The other half is a calculated, brutal game of 5D chess, played by the world's superpowers. It is a story of economic warfare, asset seizure, and the desperate battle for the 300 billion barrels of black gold that lie beneath the Orinoco Belt. Today, we are going to look past the headlines. We are going to expose the mechanics of the maximum pressure campaign, the seizure of CITGO, and the sudden, hypocritical U-turn that Washington made the moment the world ran short on energy. This is not a story about democracy. It is a story about interest. Welcome to the Nexus. To understand the present, we must understand the scale of the prize. Venezuela possesses the largest oil reserves in the world. But it is not just any oil. It is extra heavy crude. This specific type of oil is difficult to extract and difficult to refine. But historically, the global refinery system, specifically in the United States Gulf Coast, was built to process exactly this type of oil. For decades, the relationship was symbiotic. Venezuela pumped the oil, and the United States bought it. It was a flow of energy north and a flow of dollars south. But geopolitics has a way of breaking even the most profitable relationships. As the political ideology in Caracas shifted away from American influence, the response from Washington was not just diplomatic, it was financial. The strategy was simple. If you cannot control the government, you strangle the economy. In 2017, and escalating in 2019, the United States imposed some of the harshest sanctions in modern history. They didn't just target individuals, they targeted the lifeblood of the nation, PDVSA, the state-owned oil company. The goal was explicit. It was to cut off the regime's cash flow entirely. But in doing so, they cut off the Venezuelan people from the global economy. But the most fascinating and controversial move was not the sanctions themselves. It was the seizure of assets. To control a nation, you don't need to invade it with tanks anymore. You just need to control its bank accounts and its foreign subsidiaries. Enter CITGO. Most Americans know CITGO as the gas station down the street, but CITGO is a massive oil refining and marketing company based in Texas, owned by Venezuela. It was the crown jewel of the Venezuelan economy, the primary engine that turned their crude oil into hard currency. In 2019, the United States effectively seized control of this asset. They transferred the control of CITGO from the government in Caracas to the interim government, recognized by Washington. The revenue that was supposed to go back to Venezuela to fund the state was blocked. It was held for safekeeping. Imagine the precedent this sets. A sovereign nation owns a company on foreign soil, and the host government decides to simply transfer ownership because they disagree with the politics of the owner. In the world of international law, this is a gray area. In the world of realpolitik, it is a weapon. At the same time, across the Atlantic, the Bank of England refused to return nearly $2 billion worth of Venezuelan gold stored in London. The argument was the same. We do not recognize your government. So, the gold stays in the vault, the assets stay frozen, and the country collapses. This was the status quo for years. Washington declared the Venezuelan government illegitimate. They said it was a dictatorship that could not be dealt with. The sanctions were absolute. The isolation was total. But then, February 2022 happened. Russia invaded Ukraine. And the geopolitical chessboard was flipped upside down. Suddenly, Russian oil became toxic. The global West banned energy imports from Moscow. Europe was in a panic. Energy prices skyrocketed. Inflation in the US hit 40-year highs. The price of gas at the pump became a major political liability for the White House. The United States faced a mathematical problem. They had cut off Russia, one of the world's largest suppliers. Saudi Arabia was refusing to increase production to help. The strategic petroleum reserve was being drained at a record pace. The world was thirsty, and the well was running dry. And just like that, the moral principles vanished. Why? Because the US realized a terrifying truth. They needed oil, and the only place that had enough heavy crude to replace Russia, and the only place with refineries specifically designed for it, was the very country they had tried to destroy. Quietly, diplomats were sent to Caracas. The narrative shifted. The harsh rhetoric softened. The dictator became a negotiating partner. Then came the breakthrough. Chevron, the American oil giant, was granted a special license. License 41. This license allowed Chevron to resume operations in Venezuela, to pump oil, and most importantly, to ship that oil to the United States. Think about the hypocrisy. The government in Caracas hadn't changed. The leadership was the same. The human rights situation that justified the sanctions hadn't changed. What changed was the price of gas in America. What changed was the desperate need for energy security. This pivot proves a fundamental rule of the global wealth nexus. Morality is a luxury of times of peace. In times of crisis, there is only interest. The sanctions were not lifted because of a newfound respect for Venezuelan sovereignty. They were lifted because the United States needed to feed the machine. But there is a deeper layer to this game. This isn't just about replacing Russian oil. It is about blocking China. For the last decade, while the West sanctioned Venezuela, China moved in. Beijing loaned billions to Caracas to be repaid in oil. China was building a parallel energy network, one that bypasses the US dollar. Russia was also heavily involved, providing military equipment and support. The United States looked at the map and realized they were losing their own backyard. The Monroe Doctrine, the 200-year-old policy that says Latin America is the US sphere of influence, was disintegrating. If Venezuela fully integrates into the BRICS alliance and starts selling its massive reserves exclusively in yuan or rubles, it would be a dagger to the heart of the petrodollar system. The petrodollar relies on oil being traded in US currency. If the country with the world's largest reserves stops using the dollar, the dominance of the American financial system weakens. The easing of sanctions is not an act of mercy. It is a strategic countermove. It is an attempt to tether Venezuela back to the dollar system before it's too late. It is an attempt to keep Western oil companies like Chevron and Repsol in the game so that the Chinese National Petroleum Corporation doesn't take it all. This is the invisible war. It is not fought with missiles, but with licenses, currency swaps, and refinery contracts. However, the damage has been done. The infrastructure of Venezuela has crumbled after years of underinvestment and sanctions. Ramping up production is not as easy as turning a valve. It requires billions of dollars in investment. And who has that money? The West and China. So, Venezuela stands at a crossroads. To the north, the superpower that sanctioned them seized their assets, but offers a quick route to cash and refinery access. To the east, the rising powers of China and Russia, offering loans and ideological support, but demanding long-term control over resources. This brings us to the concept of the resource curse. History has shown us that having massive natural resources is often more of a liability than an asset. When you have something the empire needs, you have two choices. You either sell it on their terms, or you become an enemy. The seizure of CITGO, the freezing of gold, the sanctions, these were punishments for trying to break the terms. And the return of Chevron is the reward for compliance. But let's look at the numbers. Even with the sanctions eased, the wealth generated from this oil is unlikely to trickle down to the average Venezuelan citizen. The debt is too high. The infrastructure is too broken. The profits will go to servicing foreign debts, debts to China, debts to bondholders in New York, and operational costs to Chevron. The wealth of the nation is being siphoned off to pay for the geopolitical battles of the past decade. What we are witnessing is the brutal reality of the global energy transition. We are told that the world is moving away from oil. We are told about green energy and electric futures. But the actions of the world's most powerful governments tell a different story. They are scrambling for oil. They are fighting over every barrel. They are willing to overlook dictatorships and reverse decade-long policies just to secure the flow of heavy crude. Because they know that for the foreseeable future, oil is still the blood of the economy. The war for Venezuela is not over. It has just entered a new phase, a phase of uncomfortable partnership. The US needs the oil, Venezuela needs the cash, China needs the influence. It is a three-way standoff with 300 billion barrels at stake. So, the next time you see a headline about sanctions being imposed or lifted, ask yourself, who benefits? Follow the tankers. Watch where the oil flows. Watch which currency is used for the transaction. The illusion is that nations act based on values. The reality is that nations act based on physics and finance. Energy must flow, and the dollar must be protected. Here at Global Wealth Nexus, we track these flows because your financial future depends on understanding the game. The volatility in energy prices, the inflation in your currency, the stability of your economy. It is all decided in these backroom deals in Caracas, Washington, and Beijing. The system is rigged. The game is ruthless. But knowledge is your only defense. This is Global Wealth Nexus. Welcome to the reality.